Okay, I think we'll start the webinar now. I just wanted to welcome everyone who are logging in. My name is Priya Vellanki. I'm an assistant professor in the Division of Endocrinology at Emory University, and I'm a second-year BIRCWH scholar. And today we have our speaker, Dr. Michelle Bennett from the NIH. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michelle Bennett. Dr. Bennett is the Director for Center for Research Strategy at the National Cancer Institute, and her CV, her bio has, I can read this for the whole hour, but in this position, she's promoted several collaborative teams with investigators from diverse backgrounds. She has several awards, including the National Cancer Institute's Women's Scientist Advisors Achievement Award, and she's also co-authored a field guide for collaborative and team science, which I know there's a recent update, Dr. Bennett was telling me. And so what I'll do is first, Dr. Bennett will give us a presentation. As many of you have sent some questions, which beforehand, which Dr. Bennett will answer either during her presentation and some after. So please feel free to put in questions. Dr. Bennett can answer them after her presentation. So if there's nothing else, Dr. Bennett will begin her presentation. Thank you, Dr. Bennett.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I need to share my screen.
Share the screen. Yep. It's on your left. It's in the middle of your screen. It should say share screen. Yeah, there you go.
Is that working?
Yes.
Totally cool. All right. And now you can see it in big view.
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with this group today. I'm really excited. I was really excited to get the questions, and you'll see I tried to weave them in a little bit into the presentation. There were so many questions and so many good questions. And we were joking a little earlier, we could have created a whole week-long symposium around them. So I might not be able to get to everything, but I'm going to try to cover what I thought maybe were some of the key elements that people were really interested in hearing about. So again, thanks so much. I thought I would start just with a little story because it's kind of illustrative of team science and collaboration, and I think it gives us a few lessons that can be learned. And so in April, well, actually, I think it was in the fall of 2002, there was an observation in China that people were starting to fall ill to some sort of respiratory ailment. And at that time, it wasn't very well defined. This was in Guangdong province in China. And at that time, the country decided not to make any mention of this to the World Health Organization. Perhaps they thought they could manage it, or they understood what was going on. But then early in 2003, it became evident that there was more going on than they could manage, and so then they did report this to the World Health Organization. By that time, this unknown disease, respiratory ailment there was evidence of its having spread really throughout the world, and that's what I'm showing you here. It's sort of a map of all the places where people were identified who were suffering from whatever this was. And at the time, they weren't really sure what it was. Calling it SARS for severe acute respiratory syndrome, people really kind of went into panic. For people who were around then, people will know that things like the major meetings, like the AACR meeting that was supposed to happen in Toronto, Canada, was actually canceled. People were very concerned about this. People were buying face masks and really trying to protect themselves. People were even reminding people of how to, wash their hands and proper hygiene. So it was on March 17th in 2003 that the WHO called on a number of different laboratories in different countries and asked them if they wouldn't work together to try to figure out how to identify the causative agent. And so there's a listing of all of those laboratories that ended up participating, and I won't read through them, but if you just take a quick look, you'll see that there are entities in Europe, there are entities in the United States, China, Japan, Canada, so really a lot of different places. And so if you just think about what it might require for all of these, this number of entities in all of these different places across time zones to collaborate, I think that it'd have to be a pretty well-oiled machine, pretty well coordinated. And I think to me what's most amazing is, again, this was Monday, March 17th. And it was actually a month later, April 16th of that same year, that they actually did identify the causative agent for SARS, which was a coronavirus. And there's a photo of it here. And so if you think about what had to happen in that month to make this possible, I think it kind of makes my head swim a little bit. And so I just thought it's a really nice and a compelling story, but the reason for sharing it with you here at the beginning is that I think there are some key takeaways from this, and that I think will launch us nicely into the rest of my talk. If you think about what they had to do in terms of communication, both what they were communicating scientifically as well as the logistical coordination. So one thing you should know is that this group of people spoke to each other every day. They had a daily. So that required a lot of logistical coordination and a lot of probably willingness to be up in the middle of the night. Sharing was another major component of this overall effort, sharing of resources, data, and especially credit. I think what I like most about this story is, as it's told, if you were to ask any one person, well, who really did it? Who really identified the causative agent? They would tell you that there really was no one person, because although one person might have, quote unquote, made that discovery, it wouldn't have been possible if all of this data and information and resources hadn't been shared and sent around the world. They had a very clear shared vision. They knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish and work towards doing that. And then there were some pretty clear expectations as well. And so again, these are some of the themes that I'm going to take forward as we move through the presentation. There was a mention at the beginning about what we call the field guide, the Collaboration and Team Science Field Guide. You can get a copy of this. It's free as a PDF or as a Kindle book or as a ebook at this website. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about can be found here. So one of the things that I've learned over time as I've worked with teams and I've worked with scientists around collaboration is that I think sometimes it's weird, maybe, or hard to get your hands around the fact that I talk about things like vision, and I talk about trust, and I talk about communication, and I talk about sharing credit and resources, and I talk about setting expectations. I think what's really important to convey using this slide is that it's really your research. It's a research problem. It's a complex issue that really sits at the center. That's what's really going to bring people together from different disciplinary backgrounds to work together to solve a complex scientific problem. I think what I would like to try to convince you of as I work through this talk, though, is that if you're not tending to the vision, if you're not tending to the trust and all of these other elements that are in these bubbles outside of the research, that can actually result in the scientific team going off the tracks and ending up spending more time trying to manage personnel conflicts than they are on their research. And what I would like to do is enable teams of researchers to spend more time on the research and less time on emergencies that are impacted by things like trust or vision. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. I also want to acknowledge that collaboration introduces threats for people. And so if you think about how we're trained in the sciences, we tend to be trained with a self-identity, so sort of in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. We're trained to be individuals. We're trained to be recognized as independent thought leaders. And what we're really asking somebody to do when they move from working independently and alone to with a group, we're really asking them to take on a group identity. And the same thing is true if you think about independence versus interdependence. Being independent, making your own decisions, making your own resource decisions, deciding which way or direction a project will go, and then making that become more interdependent so that you're working with other people, you're interacting, you're integrating. That can be a very difficult thing for some people to do, especially when you're asking them to share power, share status, and share decision making. So again, just something to kind of keep in mind. So these are a few of the questions that I got, and I think it's very fair to say that many of the questions that were asked by all of you could fall into different bins. And so I won't go through and read all of them, just kind of keep them up here for a second. But I think, one of the themes that was pretty strong is managing a team. What do you do about diversity when people are very different? And what if people do have big egos? And I think we do find in the sciences that sometimes there are people who have very big egos. So what do you really need to think about? And then how does trust factor into all of this? Well, I think trust is probably one of our major themes for team science and collaboration. And the reason I say that is that I think when we started doing our research to actually study what was contributing to successful team functioning, we knew that trust was going to be important. But I don't think we appreciated how important it was until after we'd written the first version of the field guide, and people started contacting us and asking us questions and asking if we could help them work on their teams, especially if the teams had sort of gone off the tracks or there was mistrust had been established. So trust really falls at the bottom, sort of like the foundation for everything else. So a couple things that I want to share about trust that I learned over the course of studying teams that I think is really important. And this goes back a little bit to how do you manage some of the differences among people. So one of the things that is different among us as people is that we tend to fall into one of two camps. So in one camp, we tend to be very trusting at the outset when we start a new relationship. We start what I would describe as high trust. And so I'm seeing if I have a pointer. No, can you see that? The pointer? Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay. So if we start at high trust, what that means is that I start out trusting you. And really what I'm looking for in our relationship is you to work with me in a way that it sustains my trust over time. Otherwise, I will start to lose that trust. And then other half of the people start out lower trust. So they don't start out with an assumption of trust. What they're looking for in a relationship is that their interactions will result in the building of trust over time. And so I always like to say to people, just imagine that you're starting to work with somebody else. And whatever style you are, imagine that person is the opposite style. And what that might mean for getting something going. You're going to have to figure that out. And I oftentimes also tell people that I rarely introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Michelle, I'm high trust. It's not something you tend to just say to somebody, right? And so you kind of have to figure that out, and you have to be respectful of it, and then you have to figure out how you're going to build and sustain trust over time. The other thing that I've learned is that there are many, many, many different types of trust, and I'm just going to share three of them with you that I think are pretty important for building and sustaining teams. So one is called calculus-based trust, and you can read it right here. It's built on the calculations of the relative rewards of trusting or losses for not trusting. So you might be thinking, what the heck does that mean? Well, what that means is that we can set up sort of rules, we can set up some expectations for how to behave in a group setting. And whether or not people follow the rules or not will lead to our trusting them more or not trusting them. So one of my favorite examples, especially sort of in the lab or the clinical setting, is standard operating procedures. If you've got an expectation that, let's say a very simple standard operating procedure, you finish the contents of a reagent bottle, your job is to make sure there's a new reagent bottle on the shelf for somebody else to use. Really simple, right? But if somebody doesn't follow that easy, simple, what sounds like a simple standard operating procedure, that can really kind of cause ripples among the people that you're working with, because you'll really be letting them down. So I hope that makes sense. Another type of trust is called competence-based trust. And this is probably the best example I can give of this is when I was a postdoc and, I ever ran into a problem with one of my experiments or trying to get a new technique to work. There was this guy who worked down the hall from me, and I didn't know him very well, but he just had magic or golden hands, whatever you want to describe. He seemed to be able to get anything to work. And so I didn't know him well, but he always helped me. And so I really had a lot of trust in his competence. The third type of trust is identity-based trust. And this is really the type of trust that we reserve for those people who are most precious in our lives. Very, very good friends, family members, and sometimes it can be work-related relationships. But it doesn't always happen that you build this identity-based trust. And so what I like to remind people is that when we say the word trust, a lot of us think about this identity-based trust. Oh, it takes a long time to build and a moment to shatter. And that's definitely true. But this calculus-based trust is sort of a very, it's a very, like a scaffold. It's something you can create in the context of your team. And people don't have to know each other really, really well to build trust at that level. So another component of trust that has, I guess it's sort of a partner to trust, is something called psychological safety. And when I talk to teams and they mention that the team has gotten into some problems, or the research has gone off the tracks, or they're having real difficulty with the dynamics of the individuals in the team, one of the places I go is trust and also psychological safety. And so I have a couple of quotes here that describe what psychological safety is. And I'll just read them because I think they capture the essence pretty well. So being able to show an employee oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. A shared belief held by members of the team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And it describes a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect, in which people are comfortable being themselves. And so the way that I interpret this in kind of a research setting, a team science setting, is you're sitting in a meeting together and somebody's presenting their data, like we do as scientists, and somebody sees something in the data that they're not sure about, and they have a question about it. A sure sign of psychological safety is that somebody at a junior level, let's say a postdoc or a graduate student, could actually question a senior member of the team and say, you know what, I don't think I see what you're seeing. I actually question how you're interpreting that data. If somebody can't do that, then I question whether there's psychological safety. So this, I think, for leaders and participants of teams, is a really important concept to have in hand, and to really recognize that it's something that you can, as you work with a team, this is something you can work towards. So Amy Edmondson in 1999 came up with an assessment that enables organizations or groups to assess their psychological safety. And so there are 7 questions, and I think, again, I'll just read through them. And once you do the assessment, you ask people obviously to fill out a little sheet of paper, and then you can tally up and see how you're doing. So the first one is, if you make a mistake, it's often held against you. And so this is like true, false, or I guess you could do it on a likelihood scale. Members of this group are able to bring up problems and tough issues. People sometimes reject others for being different. It is safe to take a risk in this group. It is difficult to ask other members of this group for help. No one in this group would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. Working with members of this group, my unique skills and talents are valued and respected. And so you can see pretty readily what those characteristics might be, and can identify ways of being or I guess attributes of the team that you want to work with. So again, I think that's important. So now I'm going to kind of shift a little bit again, but you'll also see that a lot of these questions kind of go to the same thing. So what contributes to successful team functioning? I'm actually talking about how to launch and sustain a team over time, major obstacles? How do I find and or approach potential collaborators? What do I need to do to have people want to collaborate? So I would argue that one of the key elements, both for launching a team and sustaining a team over time, is really to have a shared vision or goal or goal. The vision is imperative if you want people to join you. It's imperative if you want people to follow you. If I came to you and said, I've got this great idea for a project, and I wasn't able to articulate to you what that idea was, why would you want to follow me, or why would you want to spend time working with me on it? We all have, 1,000 different places we could be every day, and we all have to manage our time really judiciously. So if I'm going to be involved in a project, I really want to know where are we going, what are we doing. And so the shared vision is really critical. One of the things that we learned when we were doing research, and I think one of the things I found most compelling, is that in the development or sustainment of a shared vision, when we did the research, what we did is we went out and we talked to members of teams, and we talked to everybody on the team, from the team leader to students to animal handlers to administrators to mid-level career folks. And one of the things that we found, that on the very best functioning teams, what we found is that everybody could describe the very big picture, the vision of the effort. Where are they going? What are they doing? What are they trying to achieve? The other thing we figured out and heard from people is that each team member could state his or her research goal as it relates to the bigger picture. And so you can just imagine that for people who are sort of at the mid-career or more senior, they're able to talk about much more about how all the different pieces are coming together to achieve the goal. Somebody like a summer student was very, very clear in their research goal for the summer, and they knew the big picture. They couldn't really explain all the other pieces, but they knew exactly what they were doing and how it fits in. And I think that's kind of the best takeaway I have in terms of understanding vision and working towards it. So I thought at this time too it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the model of team development. And so this is a model that was created by Bruce Tuckman in the 1960s. We're still talking about it today, so it must be a pretty decent model. Really, he developed this based on observations of teams, including scientific teams. And he came up with 4 major areas: forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I often tease people that if you don't remember anything else that I said today, you might remember these 4 stages because they rhyme, and over dinner you'll go, oh yeah, forming, storming, norming, and performing. So forming is easy because that's when the team comes together. The storming is the next stage, and that's when people start to really recognize the differences among the different people of the team. Those little differences start to show. People start to maybe they're a little protective of their turf. They're not very comfortable sharing, for example, sharing data, that type of thing. They're trying to figure out their place and everybody else's place. Expectations haven't really been set yet. The trust really isn't formed yet. So there's this stage of storming. One of the biggest risks during this stage is that the team will try to suppress the differences. They'll try to suppress the storming. Really what you want to have happen at this time is to have people engage in conversation around their differences so that they can get past them. Once you get past the storming into the norming phase, that's where the trust really firms up, expectations become clear, people are more comfortable around each other, the sharing is more generous, and then that is the perfect entree into the performing stage where people can really operate like a well-oiled machine. Probably very much like the people were operating in the SARS example that I shared earlier. I guess a couple of things about storming. It's not optional. The team has to go through a storming phase to get to the norming phase. And if there's ever adjustments in team participation, if somebody leaves the team or joins the team, then you're going to get another cycle of storming, which is fine. And at least, well, for now, I'm just going to leave the adjourning and transforming. If somebody's really interested, we could talk about it later. So this is a quote that I got out of a Harvard Business Review, folks who were studying teams, and I just think it's a great quote. The greater the proportion of experts a team had, the more likely it was to disintegrate into non-productive conflict or stalemate. So some people might be sitting there nodding their heads or smiling and saying, oh my gosh, you know, that sounds so familiar. And it is familiar, and I think this kind of goes back to the previous slide a little bit, and even back to the earlier slide about threats to collaboration. Is that I think what can happen is that we can develop an expertise, and if I start to really believe that I'm the greatest expert and I really know it all and nobody else can really contribute, then I'm not going to be a great member on the team because I'm not going to think that anybody else has anything valuable to say. And so this is one of the risks that can occur, and this is one of the things that we want to try to get around or help people to understand that to be a productive team, we've got to be able to listen to each other and to share knowledge. So a few more questions. Again, this is a little bit, there were a lot of questions about, well, how do I really manage the team? What about conflict? How do I navigate authorship? What about sharing, credit, resources, reagents? And what about junior faculty? What do we need to do that? So one of the other elements that we really honed in on is that those teams that were really successful did a great job of setting expectations. So again, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the calculus-based trust, that's one way of setting some expectations, things like standard operating procedures. The whole idea is that you create a scaffold for deeper trust. You don't want people to think that there are secrets or there are any surprises. And it enables you to be clear on how you're going to communicate, how you're going to meet regularly, what's going to happen during those meetings, how you're going to do authorship, what the expectations are for the conduct of research, technical support, and all of the other things listed on this slide. So as we've done this work, we've actually come across and or developed a number of tools that can be very useful for establishing what I would call the calculus-based trust for the team. So one is a collaborative agreement, and I'll show you an example of this. So this is really a jointly created agreement among the collaborators. It can be very, very formal, or it can be really, really informal. The welcome letter is another example, and I'll describe this one as well in just a little bit more detail. Again, another scaffold for building trust and setting some expectations. A couple of others kind of now move from more the individual team relationship to an institutional relationship. And so this is where, you know, I oftentimes point to this when people ask me, well, what do you do as a early stage investigator? Or what do you do if you've got a joint appointment in 2 different departments? Well, I think it's really important to make sure you're having conversations with the institutional leadership about your participation in the team and make sure that it's memorialized in some way. I worked with some investigators here at the NIH to actually insert some language into an offer letter because they knew that they were expecting this person to participate in team science from the point at which they were hired. And when they came up for tenure, they wanted to make sure that the tenure committee, the people doing the evaluation, knew that that was an expectation so that there, again, no surprises. And same thing, joint appointment agreements can lay out some of that type of information as well, which can be very helpful. And then if we go to even larger entities like consortia, and there are so many different consortia being created this day and age, what you often will see is like biospecimen agreements, publication agreements, data storage and sharing agreements. And again, this is a great example of how you can set expectations across the consortium, and this is just another example. So let me give you a little bit of an example of the Welcome to My Team letter. So we actually got this idea from a guy named Mariah, who works in the Child Health and Development Institute in the intramural program here at the NIH. And before he lets anybody join his lab, he provides them an 8-page letter. And I always tell people it doesn't have to be 8 pages, but this is very detailed and very thorough. And he has them read the letter, and the letter says, this is what I expect of you, this is what you can expect of me, this is what we do if we disagree. And once somebody's read the letter, if they agree to all of those things, he'll let them join the lab. But again, so that there are no surprises. I think what's interesting is that a couple of years ago, we followed up with a number of people who worked for Rich and who received these letters. Some of them thought it was a great idea at the beginning. Some people thought it was pretty hokey, but they really wanted to work in the lab, so they agreed to it. All of them are using welcome letters in their labs now. They're independent investigators, so very, very powerful. And I can get you a copy of this if you're interested in sharing it or looking at it. The other one is the collaborative research agreement, and my collaborator always used to call it a prenuptial for scientists. And the reason he called it that is because he said there were no two people more foolish than people falling in love than two people starting a collaboration. So what does this do? So this gives the collaborators an opportunity to articulate the goals and vision of the collaboration, who's going to do what. So there you go back to the expectations. How's authorship and credit going to be handled? And I know there are always different camps of people. Some people say you can't decide on authorship until the paper is written. I disagree with that, but we all have our different perspectives. But authorship can also be, if you are willing to, you can talk about what are the criteria for authorship early on, and then revisit that as a paper is coming into fruition to see how the authorship might be shifting over time based on the criteria you have decided will define who gets to be an author or not. Contingencies and communicating, so what if types of things. What if the media calls and wants to talk to somebody, who do they talk to? You could imagine some others. And then conflict of interest. If there are, if there's intellectual property or things like that that you need to be mindful of, you can deal with that too in such a document. And there's in the appendix of that field guide, there's a bunch of questions. It basically has this document in there. So how to manage conflict, how to work with different personality types, what does a successful leader look like, can junior faculty play a leadership role? So I just want to make a little plug for assessments and also a caution. And so one of the places that I would take this series of questions, especially how do we work with people who are so different and how do we manage conflict, is that there's a lot of value in taking assessments and taking assessments either individually or as a team. I think we also need to be really careful that the assessments are just a tool for learning ourselves better, for becoming more self-aware. I believe that as we become more self-aware, we become more other-aware. And so there's a lot of value in it. Assessment should never be used to label people, so that's where we need to be very careful. But the thing about assessments that I like, and I like in terms of our personal and professional learning, what they can do is they can take me from a point of unconscious and competent. And so that means that there is some behavior that I exhibit, but I don't realize I'm acting that way. And in order to become conscious of that, I either need somebody to tell me, Michelle, do you realize you do X or do Y? Or in an assessment, take an assessment that calls me out on a particular behavior. Then I become aware that I am not so competent. And if I really want to change it, that I start a practice of noticing this. When am I doing it? How am I doing it? How is it impacting other people? And then I can start changing my behavior. And so I can change my behavior so then I become consciously competent. Say, oh, okay, so I can change my behavior, but I have to think about it all the time. And then if I'm really lucky and I've worked really hard, that can move to unconscious competence. So then I start doing those things naturally and I don't even really think about So I think that in part is the value of our doing assessments for ourselves. And then, as I said, I think we become more aware of what's happening with other people, the more self-aware we become. So I just want to talk about this in the context of conflict, because there's these two people who work together, Thomas and Pillman. So it's called the Thomas-Pillman Conflict Style Indicator. And they created this really wonderful assessment so that you could assess your conflict style. And again, I'll say it one more time, that the better I know my conflict style, the better I'm able to kind of notice other people's and figure out how to work better with them. So they have they've assigned, there are 5 different conflict styles that they identified. And it goes on the following axis from low self-assertive to high self-assertive and low cooperative to high cooperative. And if you do the first one, it's the compete style. And so this is high self-assertive and low cooperative. Okay? The next one would be avoid, and this would be low self-assertive and low cooperative. The next one is to be accommodating, and so that's high cooperative but low self-assertive. Oops, wrong direction. The next one is compromise, which sort of floats in the middle, and then collaborate, which is high self-assertive and high cooperative. And so when you take this assessment, typically what happens is that you find it rates you on all 5 of these areas. And usually you find that you're pretty high in 2 or 3 of them as compared to others. And that gives you a sense of where you might need to do some work. So the first time I took this was probably about 20 years ago. I was very high in avoid and accommodate. Those are my predominant styles. I just retook this assessment about 5 years ago, and my 2 highest were compromise and collaborate. So I was really able to build more awareness about how I was behaving and actually shift it over time. So that's the other thing that I like about this assessment, is that if your behavior does change, it does capture that, unlike some of the other personality assessments where your personality is going to change very much over time. And so on this slide, it just kind of describes these different styles in a lot more detail. So competing style pursues individual concerns at the other person's expense. It's a power-oriented mode in which one uses whatever power seems appropriate to win one's own position. I used to have a boss that really fell into this quadrant. Accommodating neglects individual concerns to satisfy the concerns of the other person. Avoiding does not immediately pursue individual concerns or those of the other person, does not address the conflict. Collaborating, an attempt to work with other people to find some solution which fully satisfies the concerns of both persons. And compromising. The objective is to find some expedient, mutually acceptable solution which partially satisfies both parties, so it falls on a middle ground. So one of the things that I want to make really, really clear is that there's no one style that's good and there's no one style that's bad. These are all just different styles, and used in the appropriate situation are perfect to use. You just need to use them correctly. And so part of what we do when we take the assessment and learn what our predominant style is to say, okay, I know which styles I use really well. Now let me build some skill in using some of the others. And I think that's part of the advantage. There are challenges. The competing style is great if there's a fire and somebody needs to get everybody out of the building and somebody needs to make a decision quickly. You can't argue with that. It might not be the style, though, that if you have a team of people, you've invited a team of people together to start working on a project. If you just take the lead and don't let everybody talk, that won't work very well, and people might not come to the second meeting. So again, they all have their place. I guess the last couple of things that I just wanted to talk about was leadership. I think when we started the work that we did, we somehow imagined that there was going to be some magic formula about leadership. But we couldn't find one. If one exists, we couldn't find it. What we really ended up identifying were a number of characteristics that were common among very effective leaders of teams. So one of them is self-awareness, and so I won't talk about that anymore because I know we did a good job with them. awareness about that around you, which I've also discussed. They have a shared responsibility for success. They're accountable for issues and problems. They're great mentors to others. They know how to manage up and across. And usually if I'm talking to a group of people and I can see all of their faces, I say, does everybody know what that means? And a lot of people make this face like they don't really understand what it means. So I usually explain it, so I'll explain it to you. If you don't know what managing up and across is. But we know what managing down is. That is, I'm a manager of people and I manage them, so that would be managing down. Managing up and managing across is like managing my peers and managing those people in positions that are higher up than mine. Is that I have to learn how to work effectively with those people in order to be successful. And so, for example, if we take my boss, for example, one of the first questions I asked my boss when I knew that they were going to be my boss is I asked them how they liked being communicated with. So to me, that was really important, and that's a way that I can manage up if I make sure I'm meeting their expectations. Creating a safe environment, so that just circles us back to psychological safety. An ability to have difficult conversations, and I always tell people that when I started having to have difficult conversations, much more professionally, I would say that I was horrible at it. I think I've graduated to not so terrible. It's a hard thing to do, but it's a really, really important skill. Speaking up, challenging ideas, giving your best every day, and serving as a role model. I think the serving as a role model is one that we don't always think about, but whenever there is somebody in a leadership position, and when somebody takes on a leadership position as a new role, I like to remind them that people are going to be watching them. They're going to be watching them very carefully. And the reason they're going to be watching them is because they will model your behavior as a leader. You can tell them whatever you want, but they're not going to do what you say based on what you're telling them. They will behave and act as you do. So they, again, will model your behavior. I think sometimes that catches people off guard. So the most productive, innovative teams were led by people who were both task and relationship oriented. What's more, these leaders changed their style during the project. And so the point of sharing this with you is that I think anybody can become a very good leader. In the process of becoming a leader, though, people do need to become aware of the fact that, while there's this task piece, there's the task that needs to be done, a transactional piece, the people need to realize that developing ability to be relationship oriented as well is really important over time. And the leaders that were studied in the paper where this quote came from, that's what they did, is they saw leaders start very task oriented and they developed a more relationship focus over time. So this is the field guide that I had mentioned. The link is there. As I mentioned, you can go there and get a PDF or other version. And Howard Gavlin at one time was the NIH Ombudsman, and he and I are the ones who really started this work. And Christophe Marchand and Samantha Levine played a role in the first field guide and then the second. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit with you on team science and collaboration.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. That was a really great presentation. And I think you addressed a lot of the questions that people asked from before, but I'd like to open up this time for people to ask more questions if they have any. Just look at the question and answer box on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, and you can ask a question, or the chat screen, either one is fine. While we're waiting for questions, I have a few questions for you from the presentation. So I think as a junior faculty member, a lot of us are still in the process where we want to show our competence. We want to prove to people that we are competent. So how do you do that without coming off as, arrogant? Or, is the trust that you build in a team, that model that you talked about, the calculus-based trust, what does a junior person Is it more competence-based trust? Is it more calculus-based trust? What would you suggest? Or what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's it sounds like a simple question, and I actually think that it's a pretty complex answer, right? Because I agree with you that you need to demonstrate your competence.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be building up your network.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be reaching out to people. If you're interested in collaborating, you need to figure out, how do I reach out to somebody and actually have a conversation with them? How do I let them know that I really know what I'm doing, but not sound like I'm boasting or bragging,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
so I think it's, I don't know, again, I think this is something where I'd say there's probably no one formula. But if you can find opportunities to introduce yourself either virtually or at a meeting, set up meetings with people, I think one of the things that can be very effective is to seek out people and ask if they'd be willing to have what I would describe as an informational interview. That you have a particular interest in a particular area of science, and that you would really just like to learn more from them. Would they be willing to share some insights with you, whether it's about the science or about other aspects as well, whether it's career development or something like that. And I think slowly, building, people getting to know you, slowly over time, more and more networks will form for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's a slow process. There's, like you said, there's no formula. And how early can you start forming a team? I mean, do you wait till your K is done? I know you said you can talk to people and say, hey, I want to learn from you. And I think that's part of the K process, but how early can you start doing a project and with the team? Do you wait till you get your R01? Is that when you do it? Again, I think it goes along with showing your competence and your independence. But
I think it's a great question, and you're asking a lot of great questions that I keep saying, well, it depends, and so I think it depends here as well. I've run into people who have initiated collaborations as postdocs, so before they even have a first position.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely talked to a number of Ks who are very interested in collaborating with others and then have embarked on that. I think what you want to do is be very, mindful and careful that you don't get yourself into a bind with your institution, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we need to kind of keep, I want to separate the science from the promotion and tenure sort of process. And I think in terms of science, I think you could initiate a collaboration anytime, really. And one thing I didn't really talk about, but one of the values of having other people on your team is that you can really share leadership roles, right? There might be a place where you're very strong and a place where you're not as strong, but somebody else is strong, so they get that aspect to help manage, and it works really well. I think the other piece that we need to be mindful of is that you want to make sure you've got institutional support. Yeah. So if you're an early stage for early faculty and you're looking to become tenured at one point, going back to those agreements that I talked about, whether it's a joint appointment letter or a pre-tenure agreement where you put into writing with your department chair or with the dean or whoever is most appropriate, and outline what that looks like. What does that look like for you to be collaborating and to get credit for that collaboration when it comes time to be recognized and reviewed in the context of promotion? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. O, did you?
Yes. Dr. Bennett, thank you very much. I'm Igor Fodokun, the PI and the Program Director for the Emory BIRCWH. I do have a question for you regarding when conflict arises. Mm-hmm. As the Program Director of the BIRCWH, and also I co-direct the KL2 program here at Emory, issues do come up, especially in the mentor-mentee relationship and within the team. When those issue come? I mean, they are not as they don't come to. It's not that frequent, but how do you resolve conflict when they arise? How do you deal with them?
So I think one of the things that one hopes for is that you can catch it as early as possible. Because if emotions haven't run too high yet and people haven't gotten too entrenched, there's a possibility of sort of moving backwards a little bit and kind of deconstructing what happened and start to work it out. If it's very, very, it's at a very severe stage, you need to be probably a little bit more careful. There's a model for managing conflict that is, I think, can be very helpful, and that when you're working with two people who are in a disagreement, we really need to recognize that they're going to be two different stories. Each person is going to have their story, and they're really not going to match. And so one of the goals is to make sure that you have an opportunity to understand from each person what their story is, and then to work with them to see if they're willing to sit together to talk about how it came about that the disagreement occurred, and so that they can start to kind of deconstruct and understand what their part in the disagreement was and what, and then I know they already have a strong feeling of what the other person's part probably was. And I think then you want to try to focus on the future, not so much because it's easy for people to look back and blame, but it's more of an opportunity to say, let's look forward and figure out how we're going to move forward. One of the questions probably is whether or not they want to continue working together at all. So you have to manage that a little bit. And then if they do want to continue working together, it's really, kind of stepping back and figuring out now, how do we rebuild the trust? And so one way of rebuilding the trust is to pull those questions out that are at the back of the field guide or the collaborative agreement and say, let's sit down and let's talk about how you guys are going to work together. What are the expectations? Who's going to do what? So that you give them what I would call, again, a scaffold to work on. And again, no magic formula, but it's really got to require people being willing to sit down and talk some of this through. And if the institution has somebody like an ombudsman, that they can be very, very helpful in helping to work with something like that as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said thank you. That is really helpful.
I will continue with my trend of asking you some difficult questions. Just one more though. That model of team development that you showed was really interesting. What is the time frame that you'd expect to get into that adjourning to that aspect of team building? Is it months? Is it supposed to be years? Is it?
So I think it's highly dependent. Again, it depends. It depends on the team. It depends on the goal. So just if you look at the SARS example from very the start of the presentation, they were able to hit some sort of rhythm within a month, right? So that they turned into a very productive team. So I think you've got a couple of different things going on. It can go very fast if you're thrown into something with a group of people and you've got limited time and a very clear goal. So you can, and in a situation like that, what you have to do is you have to assume everybody's there with the best of intentions, and you have to assume that you can all trust each other. So that can happen really quickly. For a team that doesn't operate like that, it's going to take longer to work through, and I think it really depends on how frequently the team meets. If the team says, well, we're going to meet every other day for the first month, it's going to happen a lot faster than it would be if we're going to meet once a month and try to build a team over time. So it's a frequency thing, and it's and that, like I said before, it's really willingness to tackle some of the more difficult conversations. I personally tend to find that if you're going to create a new team, it's much better to have that team meeting more frequently early on. Mm-hmm. So I would say, every week or every couple of weeks at a minimum for a few months. Face-to-face is always much better in the beginning than virtual. And then once the team starts humming a little bit more, you could back off a little bit depending upon what the project is.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I think that's about all the time we have. I could ask you more questions though, but so just to end, thank you everyone for participating, especially Dr. Bennett. Again, I just wanted to remind everyone to complete the survey that will open after the webinar, and stay tuned for the next announcement for our speaker and date. And also we'll send a link of Dr. Bennett, the recording of this webinar. It's posted on the Emory BIRCWH website. If you click on the YouTube link, the recording will be there. All right, well, thank you very much. And yeah.
Thank you very much. It was great to spend an hour with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, end meeting.